Welcome, my friends. I hope that you are well. This is a cold, snowy morning for me in Colorado. Hope the weather is bright and shiny and warm for you. So I'm returning to The Agony of Eros. This book by Byung-Chul Han is about about his claim that the desire for love and maybe the ability to love in the way that is deep and intimate and significant and transformative is threatened by our individualistic tendencies, which he labels as narcissism, so love of our image, and what is entwined with that, capitalism and the commodification of everything. So this is the first chapter. This is entitled Melancholia. In recent years, the end of love has been announced many times. Love, the claim goes, is foundering because of endless freedom of choice, the overabundance of options, and the compulsion for perfection. So that makes sense to me because I remember having conversations and being privy to debates concerning the difference between love marriages love marriages and arranged marriages, or marriages that are based on choice, like complete choice. I know there's still choice in arranged marriages, but so kind of like a different cultural practices. And the argument was that arranged marriages had different goals and expectations, and therefore, because of those goals and expectations, were more long-lasting than those cultures and those marriages that were just based on choice, so personal preference, whims, feelings, emotions, etc. Of course, marriage is based on total choice, or, well, is choice ever total? Significant amount of choice in, mainly Western cultures. They can have it's based on the individual why they want to get married or be with someone, but simplistically, reductively, that was the argument. And it is hard to have the responsibility to curate one's own life path when so many options are available to you. And of course, this doesn't apply to everyone. I think there's a continuum, a sliding scale of how free people feel materially and externally about relationships. But that's what Han is saying the claim is as well. In a world of unlimited possibilities, love itself represents an impossibility. And I guess we could also find the analogy for some people to, let's say, a college student who's trying to decide on a major. Granted, some college students some 18-year-olds are really clear, not that everyone starts college at 18, but traditionally. But then there are some college students who switch majors because they could major in anything, and sometimes it's difficult to decide. Passion, too, is said to have grown cold. Eva Illouz has traced this state of affairs back to the rationalization of love and expanding technologies of choice. However, this sociological theory fails to recognize that another influence is now underway, which is corroding love far more than endless freedom or unlimited possibilities. All right, so Han is taking us further. The crisis of love does not derive from too many others so much as the erosion of the other. All right, I admit that's more nuanced and complex. I like that. This erosion is occurring in all spheres of life. It's corollary is the mounting narcissification of the self. In fact, the vanishing of the other is a dramatic process, even though, fatefully enough, it largely escapes notice. So I think it's interesting in this last phrase. I think, like Heidegger and maybe some others, Han really wants to key in to what is imperceptible, and he wants us to wake up. Eros concerns the other in a strong sense, namely what cannot be encompassed by the regime of the ego. Therefore, in the inferno of the same, which contemporary society is increasingly becoming, so he hasn't explained this yet, erotic experience does not exist. Erotic experience presumes the asymmetry and exteriority of the other. All right, here, so this kind of harkens back to Badiou's forward, which I discussed and read last time. Badiou, I think, was arguing that, maybe it's time for symmetry and not asymmetry. And let me see if I can find it. Yeah, so Badiou is saying in his foreword that maybe the kind of love that we need is working together for a sake of shared reality. And here Han is talking about asymmetry as being what is erotic. That's really interesting. It is not by chance that Socrates the lover is called a topos. The other whom I desire and who fascinates me is placeless. He or she is removed from the language of sameness. Being atopic, the other makes language indecisive. One cannot speak of the other, about the other. Every attribute is false, painful, erroneous, awkward. Our contemporary culture of constant comparison leaves no room for the negativity of what is a topos. So that's interesting, bringing Socrates up. I mean, I admit that there was probably a lot of, from the perspective of Socrates and I forget what they're called, but the older males, like the adult males who were engaging in relationships with their students and younger men, sometimes adolescent boys, talking about Greek culture. I can see that, from that perspective, the relationship was highly charged, emotionally, erotically even. But I just wonder, and I haven't done any research on this, but I just wonder how, from the perspective of those younger men, those adolescent boys that were in these relationships, because those are the relationships that Socrates, Plato talks about. So it's asymmetry in power, asymmetry in knowledge, asymmetry in age. And so obviously the age of consent was different back then and in that culture. I just wonder, even with if that was the expectation in the culture, if it wasn't erotic for the younger men, I guess, and the boys is what I'm trying to say. If there was some harm and it was a toxic coupling. So I'm not sure if bringing up the relationships and the understanding of an erotic relationship from Socrates' point of view. Of course, Socrates resisted any sort of physical connection with his younger protege lovers, that he was just so obsessed with knowledge and wisdom and sharing and these philosophic conversations that, it says in the Symposium that Socrates, was resisting the sort of advances of his pupil, his younger student, and I don't know exactly the ages, but So that is said, but nevertheless, that culture, like, I don't know, seeing that culture as an example, I'm not sure is going to be like healthy for young people, but I'm not sure that's the asymmetry that we want. But that's just me. It's just a thought that I would like to put out there. I think that's an interesting, reference. Our contemporary culture of constant comparison leaves no room for the negativity of what is a topos. We are constantly comparing one thing to another, thereby flattening them to the same, precisely because we no longer experience the atopia of the other. And I guess when, people are on dating apps and you're swiping left and right or scrolling through the profiles, they all kind of seem the same. They're reduced to what they put on their profile. So I guess that might be an example. The negativity of the atopic other refuses consumption. So here we go. Here, I think he is signaling that his definition and his understanding of negativity is tied up with commodification and consumption. Because if it's a negative difference, which is what he wants, a negative difference, that's going to be what refuses consumption, confuses being commodified, is outside of the realm of capital. There's no selling, there's no buying, there's no exchange. I don't know, is there an exchange? I'm going to hold off on that. But the rest of what I said. So, I don't know. I think that is something interesting to think about. What kind of difference is commodified and is happy and easy and smooth, and what kind of difference is potentially rich and transformative and not able to be commodified, and therefore would not be interesting to companies advertising, the diversity in their institutions. Therefore, the society of the consumer, and this could be because I've always wondered concerning cancel culture and the representation of diversity concerning companies, because sometimes, for instance, like maybe certain days of celebration, I see companies have post advertising on their social media accounts that display the diversity that they're wanting to represent or display or express. And then people in the comments are saying basically like, no, this company is canceled, or maybe even not that extreme. Like, they identify that practice as being sort of superficial and kind of a token representation. Like the question is, well, what are you really doing? Are you really interested in diversity, or are you really interested in, diversity is a hot commodity right now, so I'm going to attach this to my company because what I care about is profit. Somehow people who are highly tuned in, probably like insiders to their groups that are being represented by these companies, they're privy to the difference between what Han is talking about, positive and negative difference that is able to be commodified, difference that is not able to be commodified. Therefore, the society of the consumer endeavors to eliminate atopic otherness in favor of consumable heterotopic differences. In contrast to otherness, difference is positive. Yet today, so there's also so I said like positive and negative difference, so he wants to use otherness versus difference, I guess. I think you can think both ways. I think actually comparing one kind of difference with another kind of difference makes more sense, but It's fine. Yet today, negativity is disappearing everywhere. Everything is being flattened out into an object of consumption. And yeah, I mean, I would agree. It's difficult to resist commodification of the self, of others, of anything. You know, if I think some of the sentiments in conversations I've had, you know, where maybe we were talking about, well, how do we get the world to want to be more environmentally conscious, you know? And it's always brought up, well, how can we make this profitable to companies to be environmentally sound? You know, so it's like the only way we can get things done and be productive is by making something a commodity. So it will be attractive for people with power and money and businesses to sell it and advertise it. Because you think about, like, what is not advertised? Probably that which is beneficial and contributes to our emotional well-being, but cannot be commodified. So no one's going to pay whatever advertising costs, millions of dollars, to sell something that can't really be sold. Today we live in an increasingly narcissistic society. Libido is primarily invested in one's own subjectivity. Narcissism is not the same as self-love. And I think this is where I disagree, because I think that it's a human need to connect with others in a deep, intimate way. It's people who have experienced this kind of connection understand that it's life-giving, it's sacred, and people long for longingness, even if we are increasingly communicating over social media and not in real life anymore. Like, there are fewer, you know, gathered public discussions or forums, etc. I mean, in real life, that still exists in academia, and that's what I'm familiar with. But I think that human beings, even if we are distracted by capitalism, even if we are distracted by the fear that we're not going to be successful, or the fear that success defined by capitalism, or we're not going to be able to be financially independent or stable, or, you know, our own work slaves instead of the work slaves of others. I think that people still have that primal energy of desiring what Han is calling the other. So I don't think that the majority is so oblivious that they're ignoring their instinctual primordial needs concerning, like, what it is to be human. I'm just not convinced. The subject of self-love draws a negative boundary between him and herself and the other. The narcissistic subject, on the other hand, never manages to set any clear boundaries. So why are boundaries important? Boundaries are important so that you don't violate, or no one violates your boundaries. For instance, just, you know, if someone's giving you unsolicited advice and they do this often, or they're judgmental or critical, like, let's say it's a family member, or it's a significant other, a friend, or child, or whatever, it's important for someone's sanity and well-being to set a boundary, which means that the other person needs to reflect and try to change and modify how they are relating to you, or there will be some consequences. Maybe space you created, you know, a time away from each other. You know, it's putting a stop to abusive relationships. It's also putting a stop to, another example of this would be taking advantage. So if two people, let's say, one of them didn't have good boundaries, or they both didn't have good boundaries, one might take undue responsibility for the other's problems and needs. You know, I think this happens a lot in parent-child relationships. Maybe the adult child is relying too much on the parent, and the parent, you know, feels guilty or obligated. I guess it could also happen the other way, where the parent wants to continue to parent all throughout the adult child's life, even if the adult child is, X age. And establishing boundaries takes courage, and wanting to establish boundaries, I guess, requires that you not be a narcissist. So I agree with my research on narcissism, like clinical narcissism, that boundaries are a bad thing to the narcissist because of what they want. In consequence, the border between the narcissist and the other becomes blurry. The world appears only as adumbrations of the narcissist self, so like shadows, which is capable of recognizing the other in his or her otherness, much less acknowledging this otherness for what it is. Meaning can exist for the narcissistic self only when it somehow catches sight of itself. It wallows in its own shadow everywhere until it drowns in itself. So the narcissist only wants a mirror. And this is maybe my problem with philosophers or anyone, authors. Eckhart Tolle does this, who are not clinical psychologists and are not using words that have been sort of, I guess, taken up by psychology and what is it called, the DSM-V, and they're using it in a very colloquial way, and I think that it can be very confusing because narcissism, clinical narcissism, is not widespread. Like it is like any other true mental illness that is persistent and consistent and diagnosed. It's going to be rare in society for it to be actually diagnosed and actually what it is. And so I don't think you could claim that everyone is a narcissist if you're really looking at the clinical definition. Now, he's not, I guess. But someone who has researched and understands the clinical definition is going to have a hard time trying to separate the two, I will say, because there's some overlap here. So my question to you would be, what do you think? Do you think that people should be able to use, authors, writers should be able to use these kind of terms like, Eckhart Tolle, when I think about his writing, he wrote The Power of Now and The New Earth. I think his big one is The Power of Now. He talks about how culture, and Han does this too, with other things. He does this with, I think in Capitalism and the Death Drive, cutting. And they tried to give a source explanation of culture to mental illness. Now, is there a connection between culture and mental illness? Perhaps, but the way they're taking the mental illness completely out of the realm of scientific psychology. So I don't know, how does that help? Does it not help? I think readers who have any particular experience themselves or with people close to them with diagnosable mental illness are going to perhaps feel uncomfortable or question the use, how it's used. I think the same thing goes for like the term asexuality. Asexuality, just like any sort of relational orientation, is a specific orientation, but people use the term asexual to not refer, like without consciousness or without understanding of this community. So I think it, just for clarification and just, it's important to define, just read Wittgenstein not too long ago. It's important to define the language game that you're playing. Depression is a narcissistic malady. Okay, and there you go again. Like, do all people who experience depression, are they narcissists? No, actually, a lot of them are probably, some of them are probably victims of narcissistic abuse, or their depression is concerning other things. But I guess, trying to be generous and give him the benefit of the doubt, if he's talking about the kind of depression that is because of, I'm grasping here, isolation maybe, or, that's what he's talking about. Individualism, then I guess, I don't know. It's a tricky, problematic road to go down to make that connection, and he says it with such, I don't know. Okay, this is not what we're doing. We're reading, we're agreeing. Okay. It derives from overwrought, pathologically distorted self-reference. The narcissistic depressive subject, this just eats me, has exhausted itself and worn itself down. He just needs to clarify and be very, very specific here if he's going to say this. He's using words as if they are umbrella terms, and it's insulting, honestly, to people who have depression, to call them narcissists and say that their cause is narcissism. Like, does it matter if it's insulting, if it's true? I mean, no, but I'm saying it's insulting because it's not going to be true for most people with actual depression. He should use another word. Okay. We're fine. Eros pulls the subject out of... Okay, Eros and depression are opposites. Eros pulls the subject out of itself toward the other. Depression, in contrast, plunges the subject into itself. So can you be erotic when you are depressed? I don't know. Let me know. Today's narcissistic achievement subject seeks out success above all. Finding success validates the one through the other. Thereby, the other is robbed of otherness and degrades into a mirror of one. I kind of get this if he's talking about commodification, because when you are trying to relate to others or attract others to yourself in order to get something from them in sort of a capitalistic exchange, then you are dehumanizing them and objectifying them and not seeing them as real humans. You don't care as long as they buy your product. The logic of recognition ensnares the narcissistic achievement subject more deeply in the ego. The corollary is success-induced depression. The depressive achievement subject sinks into and suffocates in itself. So I think that's it. Like, what kind of depression are you talking about? Eros, in contrast, makes possible experience of the other's otherness, which leads the one out of a narcissistic inferno. It sets into motion freely willed self-renunciation, freely willed self-evacuation. So this sounds like annihilation of the ego, which has its roots in, I would say, medieval theology, but possibly other time periods and spaces. That's just what I'm familiar with. It definitely has a presence. Let's not say roots. I don't know if I'm that confident. A singular process of weakening lays hold of the subject of love, which, however, is accompanied by a feeling of strength. This feeling is not the achievement of one, but the gift of the other. In the inferno of the same, the arrival of the atopic other can assume apocalyptic form. In other words, today, only an apocalypse can liberate, indeed redeem. And he is moving us toward the Zizek'ian description of the film Melancholia. I think Zizek talked about it first. I don't know. Let me know. Thus, Lars von Trier's Melancholia begins with the announcement of an apocalyptic, disastrous event. I do love the Zizek's reading of this, and therefore Han's. Disaster literally means unlucky star. I love that. That's really cool. I love that etymological turn. On her sister's estate, Justine stares into the night sky and sees a reddish glow, which later proves to be a starless planet headed for Earth. This heavenly body, Melancholia, is a disastrum. which sets fatality in motion. At the same time, however, it is a negative, emanating a healing, cleansing effect. The name Melancholia is paradoxical insofar, my gosh, I can't read, as this planet heals the depression that has taken the shape of a particular form of melancholy. It manifests itself as the atopic other, which tears Justine out of the swamp of narcissism. She experiences a veritable blossoming under the influence of the death-bringing planet. I mean, so is Justine, who has anxiety, also a narcissist? You just can't call everyone a narcissist. Again, I know he's using narcissism in a very loose way, but that I just don't agree that you should use it in a loose way. If you know anything about actual narcissism, it just can't be used like that. Eros conquers depression. The tense relationship between love and depression commands the cinematic discourse of Melancholia from the film's inception. The prelude from Tristan and Isolde, which frames the film musically, invokes the power of love. Depression represents the impossibility of love. Alternatively, it is the impossibility of love that has led to depression. Only the planet Melancholia, the atopic other, breaking into the inferno of the same. Why is the planet called Melancholia? Arouses erotic desire in Justine. The nude scene at the rocks on the river's edge presents the body of a lover aglow with sensuality. Eagerly, Justine writhes in the blue light of the heavenly body that is bringing death. The scene intimates that Justine, in fact, desires the deadly collision with the atopic wandering planet. She awaits the approaching catastrophe as joyous union with her beloved. Okay, so let me explain this with an example. I think an example that would relate this sort of desiring the annihilation by the other in order to liberate oneself and truly be saved. I think a good example is throwing someone in a swimming pool. So if you have a situation where there's, your playful significant other is saying, I'm going to throw you in the swimming pool, and the other person sincerely does not want to be thrown in the swimming pool because maybe they don't want to get wet, or they don't want to ruin whatever they're wearing. Maybe they're not in bathing suit attire. They really don't want to. But after the potentially, I'm not suggesting everyone do this, but potentially that is a situation that the person who doesn't want to be thrown in the swimming pool doesn't want to because of their fear and their anxiety. And once they get thrown into the swimming pool because the significant other ignores them, hopefully, maybe, not always, they could be really mad, but it's possible that they realize that, oh, this is kind of fun. Nothing really bad happened, and they're kind of saved from their rigid, controlling, if that's the case, their rigid, controlling stance. I don't know if that example makes sense to me. It's the situation of being pushed to go outside of your comfort zone, and then once you're outside of your comfort zone, you are so thankful because that kind of saved you from your ever narrowing zone of living. Right? I mean, people have to do this to get outside of, let's say, their OCD. You have to, if you're, or a phobia, right? So it's a clinical practice that if you are scared of something, let's say you're scared of spiders, or you're scared of dogs, or you're scared of germs, or whatever it is, it's going to not help you in the end if you keep thinking up more and more strategies to make yourself feel safe and to avoid the situations that make you feel scared. So the process is desensitization. First, something is contaminated or something is threatening or something is, I guess it's all threatening. But you kind of like little by little expose yourself. And the more you expose yourself, the more comfortable you do get. And there you are on the road to being where you want, which is not scared of everything or scared of what is commonly encountered in the world. And I think what Han and Zizek are talking about, Zizek talks about this in The Event, the same film, in the same way. I think they're just like, it's a one and done. Like you are pushed beyond, and then you are amazed at how resilient and how powerful and how, this was really a good thing. So I guess really Han is saying that being in this state where you are making decisions out of fear, whether that be with relationships or your career or whatever, that's at the same time, it's fearful, but it's also comfortable. You're not doing what might be able to risk it all. Like I'm just thinking of social media again and how, we who are on social media, how do we stay true to our path and our personality and who we are, even if no one's doing things like we're doing them? And I think doing things like other people are doing, I think why that is tempting is because we see people who are doing things as many people are doing them, and they've been rewarded financially with success, with fame, with power, with money. They've been rewarded. So that's it's not necessarily a tried and true path, because we're being deceived by, the handful of people who have done it one way and have been rewarded. There's a lot of people who try to do it that way, and it doesn't work. But I think that's why it's, if you don't have a successful representative of your way, then you are going to have to be that representative. Okay, so going on, where was I? I have no idea. The scene intimates that Justine, in fact, desires the deadly collision with the atopic wandering planet. She awaits approaching catastrophe as joyous union with her beloved. Inevitably, Isolde's Liebestod comes to mind. As death draws near, Isolde also yields lustfully to the world breath's wafting universe. It is no coincidence that precisely this scene, the only erotic sequence in the entire film, features the prelude from Tristan and Isolde again. Magically, it invokes the proximity of Eros and death, apocalypse, and deliverance. So this is just such a theme in the medieval mystics. The theme and the juxtaposition of the erotic with annihilation and death for a rebirth in heaven with the beloved, the divine beloved. Paradoxically, the approach of death animates Justine. It opens her to the other. Liberated from narcissistic captivity, Justine also devotes caring attention to her sister and her sister's son, so maybe she wasn't able to do before, maybe held back by her mental condition. The film's real magic lies in Justine's miraculous transformation from a depressive into a lover. Thus, the atopia of the other turns out to be the utopia of Eros. Cannily, the director uses well-known classical paintings to steer the film discursively and reinforce a particular symbolism. Thus, in the surrealistic opening sequence, he fades in Peter Bruegel's The Hunters in the Snow to induce deep, wintry melancholy in the viewer. In the background, the landscape borders the water like Claire's estate, which blends into Bruegel's painting. Both scenes display a similar topology as the wintry melancholy of Hunters in the Snow extends to the world of the characters. The hunters trudge homeward, downcast and in dark attire. The blackbirds in the trees make the winter landscape even gloomier. The sign of the inn, displaying the image of a saint, hangs at an angle and is almost falling down. Then black flakes fall slowly from the sky, consuming the picture like a fire. This melancholy winter landscape is followed by a scene that resembles a painting. Here, Justine is presented in the style of John Everett Millais. With a wreath of flowers in hand, she floats on the water like the lovely Ophelia. Okay, so I haven't seen Tristan and Isolde, and I don't know Bruegel's painting, but I would guess that what he's trying to say is talking about the beauty and the catharsis of death. It's like the relief you get when you have radical acceptance of something. Which kind of makes me think that, that's how Han talks about Buddhism. It's a religion of radical acceptance, not trying to change something, because I guess changing something can be delusional and full of control. I don't know, not always, but yeah, again, we have to be nuanced. Certain kinds of change. After an argument with Claire, Justine succumbs to despair once more. Her helpless gaze wanders over abstract paintings by Malevich and books lying open on a shelf. In a fit of rage, she tears the books down, then replaces them with other pictures portraying unfathomable human passions. Just at this moment, the prelude from Tristan sounds forth again. Once more, it is a matter of love, desire, and death. The first image Justine reaches for is Bruegel's Hunters in the Snow. Then she grabs a volume of Millais with the painting of Ophelia, followed by Caravaggio's David with the head of Goliath, Bruegel's The Land of... I don't know how to say that. Cockney? Something, maybe. And finally, a drawing by Carl Friedrich Hill, all the names, Han, depicting a forlorn baying stag. Okay, that's the thing. I think that the task when reading a book that refers to various paintings and films and other books is to maybe explore them. So I'm going to do that maybe later today. The lovely Ophelia drifting in the water with her mouth half open, her gaze lost in the beyond like a saint or a lover, points to the proximity of Eros and death yet again. Hamlet's beloved dies surrounded by fallen flowers, singing like a siren, Shakespeare writes. Ophelia dies a beautiful death. I said it last time. Millais' painting shows a flower that Shakespeare does not mention, a red poppy which signifies Eros' dreams and intoxication. Caravaggio's David with the head of Goliath is also an image of death and desire. It sounds very Freudian, doesn't it? In contrast, Bruegel's Land of Cockney, that's what I'm going to say it, depicts an overstuffed society of positivity, an inferno of the same. Here the swollen figures lie about apathetically exhausted by satiety. Even the cactus has no thorns. It is made of bread. Everything is positive inasmuch as it is edible and consumable. This gorged company resembles the morbid wedding party earlier in the film. Tellingly, Justine places Bruegel's Land of Cockney next to an illustration by William Blake, which depicts a slave suspended by the ribs but still alive. Here, the invisible violence of positivity stands opposed to the brutal power of negativity, which exploits and robs. If Han is Wanting negativity, why? I thought exploiting and robbing was supposed to be connected with positivity. Justine leaves the library immediately. I mean, maybe this harkens back to Foucault. It's kind of like he says that power that is invisible is a lot more malicious than power that is just in your face, like the physical torturous power that was experienced, or that is experienced in some cultures, I don't know, but was experienced in the past for sure. That is almost a better kind of power, even though it's torturous, because there can more easily be a revolution. You can't really revolt against what you can't see. So maybe that's what he's trying to say here. Justine leaves the library immediately after opening a book to Hill's picture of the stag and placing it on the shelf. The image stands for the erotic desire for yearning for love that she feels. Clearly, Lars von Trier knew that Carl Friedrich Hill suffered from psychosis and depression. This sequence of images illustrates the discourse of the film as a whole. Eros, erotic desire, conquers depression. It delivers us from the inferno of the same to the atopia, indeed the utopia of the wholly other. All right, so I have this thought that Han is not a postmodernist, that he is a neo-modernist. Postmodernists find meta-narratives suspect. And I've read somewhere recently, if I could think of the source, I would tell you, that all utopias, was it in Lyotard? I don't know. That's what I'm reading right now. All utopias, and maybe we can argue against this, are some form of totalizing meta-narrative. Maybe I'm making too much of this, but I feel like that feels like textual evidence to me. In Melancholia, the apocalyptic sky resembles the empty firmament that Maurice Blanchot makes the primal scene of his childhood. It reveals the utopia of the wholly other by suddenly interrupting the same. I feel like he still hasn't explained the same. That idea, that concept. Suppose this. The child, he is 7 years old, or 8 perhaps, standing by the window, drawing the curtain and through the pane looking. What happens then? The sky, the same sky, suddenly open. Absolute black and absolutely empty, revealing such an absence that all has since always and forever been lost. I guess I have another example of this sort of annihilating liberation. It's kind of like when someone says something, like says it out loud that everyone's thinking, or that we would never be so brave to say, and it shatters the structure of your belief. But at the same time, it feels so relieving, like a cleansing water flowing over you, that someone just said it and it kind of saved you. I remember having that experience with back in graduate school. It was a very pastoral scene. There was just a bunch of girls, we were sitting on the grass and towels and chairs. And there was this girl who, I don't know if she has a Facebook page anymore, and I can't remember her name, but it was something like The Theological Atheist or something was her page. And maybe someone asked her, so she was saying, I'm an atheist. And then someone was asking her, aren't you afraid of hell? And then there are a lot of Catholics in our group. And she said, no, take me to hell. Bring it on. I'll deal with that. And it was just, I don't know exactly what she said. She probably said it a lot better than that. But that was the gist. That was the statement. And she was so like rebellious and strong and brave and courageous. And she was just like, yeah. She wasn't like, no, I just don't believe in hell. I don't think that that'll happen. She was like, do it. And that kind of powerful response, I think, really inspires people. Like, yeah, you don't have to be scared or afraid of something. There's an alternative to that. Like, maybe just know that you will be able to deal with whatever happens instead of, praying, hoping that something will or won't happen. Just say, if what I don't want happens, or if what I want doesn't happen, like, bring it on. I know that I'll still be able to survive. I think a therapist said that to me once. I don't remember the situation or what I was saying, but it was so empowering. I think I was trying to break up with someone and I didn't know how to break up with them. It's just a very personal problem of mine. And it was a long time ago. And she said, you know what? And I was worried about that. I was stressed out about this. I was stressed out about the fact that I could not be strong enough and just say it. It was so scary to me to say, I don't want to be with you anymore. This is over, or whatever, in a nicer way probably than that. But that's the gist. And it was so scary for me to say it. And I was so distressed by leading this person on because I didn't want to be with them. And I was so distressed by being so weak and so pathetic, not being able to say the words that I needed to say, not being able to confront the person. And so I was stressed out about a lot of things concerning this. And my therapist, that I think I only went to 3 times, I'm so sorry, California therapist, but I don't know, it's so hard for me to pay for therapy because I'm stupid and I want to pay for books. So anyway, she said, you know what? When you really are ready to break up, when you need to do this, you'll do it. You'll do it. And that was so empowering. I'm like, yeah, I will get to the point where I just can't do it anymore. And, maybe, I don't know, maybe people would disagree that that's good advice, but it made me feel a lot better. And yeah, I was eventually able to do it. So I don't know. That's just I think it's good to have other examples. Okay, we're almost finished, so we're just going to start. We're just going to finish. What happens then? The same sky suddenly open, absolutely black and absolutely empty, revealing such an absence that all has since, always, and forevermore been lost. The vertiginous knowledge that nothing is what there is, and first of all, nothing beyond. The unexpected is the feeling of happiness that straightway submerges the child. The ravaging joy to which he can bear witness only by tears, an endless flood of tears. He says nothing, he will live henceforth in the secret, he will weep no more. So that was a quote from Maurice Blanchot, The Writing of the Disaster. Oh, that sounds interesting. I feel like I want to. Is Tristan and Isolde like an opera? Wagner. I don't know. Okay, I'm not cultured at all. I'm gonna watch and listen and look at all these things, all these references, and maybe that's what my next video will be. So the child I don't know how you say that, describes is enraptured by the infinity of the barren sky, torn out of himself and emptied into an atopic outside, dissolved and drained. The disastrous event, this invasion of the exterior and wholly other, unfolds as dispossession, an annulment and avoiding of the own. That is, it unfolds as death. The sky's emptiness, the disaster as withdrawal outside the sidereal abode. And yet disaster fills the child with ravaging joy, indeed with the happiness of absence. Herein lies the dialectic of the disaster, which also structures Melancholia. catastrophic fatality abruptly switches over into salvation. So that's the key, that's the thesis. Catastrophic fatality abruptly switches over into salvation. I feel as if to really understand at least the second half of this chapter, it would be good to know these references. So maybe I'll do that and be back. Thanks, everyone.